Hey there, and welcome to day 5 of the Design a Modern Triangle Challenge. Today is our last day, and now that you have your triangle and your hexagon designed, what are your next steps? Now, getting your design from paper to fabric is one of the bigger struggles that I hear from quilters who want to design. So in this video, we're going to talk about some options available to you. But first, I'm going to pause and celebrate because look at you. You designed a modern triangle and a modern hexagon, and I think you had a little bit of fun, right? Oh my gosh, that was such a goofy smile and a goofy thing to say. But the goal for this challenge was to get you designing in a really fun way. And whether or not I'm goofy or not, I think we've met our goal. You designed and we all had fun. And I'm so glad that you had fun and were successful because there's really so much possibility when it comes to design. And I'm just really excited for that door to start to open up for you. So I'll talk about your next steps in terms of going deeper, in terms of learning more about design. But first I want to talk about your next steps with this particular triangle that you designed. So really, in terms of your next steps, you have 3 options. One option would be to foundation piece your triangle. The second option would be to piece your triangle and then trim it down using an acrylic ruler. And then the third option would be to use your design as inspiration for a quilting design. So you would just be using your design and painting it essentially with thread, right? And we're going to talk through those examples, but I want to make sure that I mention that I've got a handout for you. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I want you to know that I have a graph sheet of paper available to you as a downloadable, and this might help you do some planning and maybe do some quilt math if you need to. So we're going to push pause on that until we get to the piecing your triangle. But I wanted to mention the download because I have a tendency to get carried away. Your first option when it comes to taking your design from paper to fabric is going to be foundation piecing. I love foundation piecing right now because I don't have to do any quilt math, especially for this design. I can just cut out my paper triangle right here and use it directly as a foundation. So that's kind of the cool thing about foundation piecing, especially for this type of design. So there's a couple different ways you can create a foundation depending on your progress and your process. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways. Let's say you had made a copy before you colored in your hexagon. The easiest way then would be to cut a singular triangle from your copy and then just treat that singular triangle as your foundation pattern. But let's say that you colored your hexagon, because that's what I told you to do inside the challenge. What you would then do is recreate your foundation, your pattern, on the hexagon paper here, and then cut out a singular triangle right here and use that as your foundation. And finally, your third option, depending on how you like to foundation piece, would be to use this gridded triangle paper to recreate your pattern and your foundation so that there's seam allowances on your foundation. And it's really just a matter of personal preference. So do what's easiest for you and do what works with your maker style. I'm going to walk you through the rest of the instruction using this triangle. Okay, so at this point, I have one of my triangles cut from my hexagon design here. I'm going to put these aside, so they're going to go off camera. And then I've got this blank triangle that I can make into my foundation. The next thing I need to do is assign numbers. For foundation piecing, you'll need to think through what order you'll need to sew your foundation. As you decide what order your foundation piecing will go in, you'll need to think through which fabric will be last. So this fabric, this piece up here, this will need to be last because it needs to finish off this seam right here. And then this needs to be second to last, this piece right here. And then it doesn't matter what order these 3 are pieced in. So over here, I have me starting 1, 2, 3. It might be easier to do 1, 2, 3. And then come up here and do 4, and then 5. So that's the order for this particular block. So that is the general overview for creating the foundation for this block. Now, one thing you'll notice is that on the foundation, these points come right down to the base corners of the triangles. But in the fabric version, there's the seam allowance built in. So right here, there's some extra fabric on these sections down here. That's the seam allowance. So just looking at this from behind, if you put the triangle, the foundation, if you layer the foundation on top of the fabric one, you'll see the seam allowance bordering the foundation. So one thing to keep in mind as you're foundation piecing, you'll need to add in your 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to show you a few different examples of foundation pieced triangles. So right here, this is another example. So this is what the triangle looks like, and the foundation is still on the block here. So I've got the foundation, and I actually love using freezer paper, so I've got my freezer paper technique here. But I wanted to show this here so you see that the seam allowance is added on to the foundation. So I've got that seam allowance extending past that foundation. Okay, so far I've shown you foundations that are one piece. They're one triangle. Depending on the complexity of your block, you might need to group your sections of your triangle. So let's look at this example. So this example plays with that center line here. And what that means is my foundation, I needed to group my foundations into 2 groups. So I have a left side and a right side. And zooming in so you can get a better view. So again, this is a triangle that plays with that center seam. And so my foundation needed 2 pieces. So I've got that left side and the right side. And then you can see the faint lines here of my foundation. And then one more example of a block that uses 2 pieces. Again, this design plays with the center line. And so for this block, I needed to split it up into 2 pieces. So you can see the left side and the right side. Okay, that is a big general overview of how you might take your triangle design and turn your triangle into a foundation that you could take in paper piece or freezer paper piece. I know that's a general overview, and this isn't meant to be a class on freezer paper or paper piecing, but I do want to give you some take-home tips that I just went over. So 1, make a copy just in case. 2, you'll want to think carefully of the order that you foundation piece your triangle in. 3, you want to make sure that you add in the seam allowance to your foundation. These papers don't have seam allowances, so add in your seam allowance. And then 3, the other thing I want you to think about is you might need to separate your triangle and so that you have 2 pieces, so a left side and a right side, and it might even get more complex than that. It just really depends on your design. The second option you have is to piece your triangle. So I'm going to walk you through an example of what a piece triangle might look like. I have to be honest, the main reason I love piecing my triangles is because it can make hard looking blocks really simple. So for example, this is an example from the Design Improv with Triangles workshop, but you can see I made a strip set, and my next step to finish this triangle block would be to line up my ruler or my trimming template and then cut the triangle. And that way I have a really lovely finished triangle, but I don't have the fuss of trying to figure out what angle this should be and how long this should be. I'm really just creating a strip set, and it's as easy as that. So this is an example of a triangle that's been made from a strip set. This is another example. This is another example. And this is another example. And it's really just a fun way to piece a strip set and then take it a little bit fancier and cut a triangle from it. Now the downside to this method is there's a little bit more quilt math involved. So what I do is I will mock up my triangle design. So maybe I drew it in my sketchbook real small, and I'll blow it up on a life-size triangle like this example here. And this triangle grid is true to size, so this is 1 inch. And then I would add my seam allowances to the strips, right? So this graph paper helps me to figure out some math and figure out how long I need each strip to be and how wide I need each strip to be. So you can see, like, this is supposed to be 1 inch finish, so I cut a 1.5 inch wide strip, and I went to the extreme here. I didn't want to do any sort of fiddly math, so I made this as long as I needed it to be. So this is where this grid comes into play. So I've made this graph paper available to you. The height is a 4-inch finished triangle. And so if you come up with a triangle that would be better pieced using strip piecing, for example, you'll be able to translate your design over to the graph paper. And the graph paper is true to size, so you'll be able to get a better idea of the dimensions. And this should help you with the quilt math. So you'll know how wide to cut your strips and how long to cut your strips. When you cut your strips, don't forget to add in the seam allowances. So you're going to need to add in a 1/2 inch in total, a 1/4 inch on either side. So this is another option when it comes to taking your paper design to a fabric. The last way that you can take your paper design and turn it into fabric would be to use your design as a quilting idea. So this design I really loved. However, there is no way I would piece this. So zooming in closer so you can see this beauty. It's really pretty, right? But you can see that all these fabrics here, I personally am not that kind of piecer. That wouldn't bring me joy, so there's no way I would piece this. However, this would make a really lovely quilting design. And I know a lot of us quilters struggle with how to quilt things. So this would be a great way to generate quilting ideas for hexagon quilts or equilateral quilts, or any quilt that uses a 60-degree design element in there. So when I first made this block, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so pretty. And then you can see once I got here, and then I stopped coloring because I was like, oh gosh, I wasted so much time designing this and I'm never going to piece this. And then later it occurred to me that I could use this as well, it could be a standalone triangle for one. It doesn't have to be a hexagon, but I could use this hexagon as a quilting design. So all was not lost. Now those are the 3 different ways you can take your paper design and translate it to fabric. We talked about foundation piecing. We talked about strip piecing or piecing and then using an acrylic ruler to trim it down to the right size. And then the third way is to use your paper design as an inspiration for how to quilt it. The last thing I want to say before we close out is you know what type of technique you love. So whether you love applique, curves, paper piecing, strip piecing, you are going to be making a lot of block ideas. And so what I would encourage you to do is choose blocks that are going to be true to your maker personality. So if you don't like applique, don't pick a block that has you making applique. Don't do that. You don't need to do that to yourself. Okay, so pick something you enjoy. All right, my friends, as we start wrapping up, I want to bring us back to our goal. Our goal for this challenge was really simple. It was to get you designing in a really fun way here. And so we took the idea of a paper cut snowflake, and we took that idea and we translated and applied it to designing modern triangles and modern hexagons. As your instructor, I would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this challenge. So comment below with your biggest aha moments or your biggest light bulb moments. So I want to hear from you, and your co-challenge takers would love to hear from you as well. And that way, by looking at all those comments, we can see what resonated with different people and what other people saw as important. So comment below. All right, my friends, as we close up our challenge, I think you'll find that this design strategy is incredibly powerful and useful. But after some point, you might find that your designs all start to look the same. So I want to suggest a couple of options for you. One option you have would be to supplement your designs with the designs found in modern triangle quilts. And in a way, we would be making a quilt together. So your blocks and my blocks, and then we could make a quilt together. But by incorporating different designs and different design strategies, you're going to make your own blocks more compelling, and you're going to make your quilt more dynamic and give your viewer a more visually interesting quilt. The second option you have would be to learn more design strategies. So if you would love to learn more fun design strategies, then I want to invite you to check out my signature program, Design Improv with Triangles. And inside that program, we take the triangle and we explore elements of design. The triangle is just one motif in design that you can play with. But to keep our focus really narrowed in on design principles, we use that triangle motif to explore those design principles. So though you'll be creating more triangle designs, the principles and the design strategies that you learn inside Design Improv with Triangles will apply to other shapes other than the triangle. So those are the two options you have to go further with triangles and take you further with design. All right, my friends, it is time to wrap up our challenge once and for all. I hope that you've enjoyed this challenge. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it, and I hope you've had a lot of fun. I certainly have had a blast as your instructor, and I am just incredibly awed by what we've accomplished in just this short week. Okay, so if you'd like to go further with me, check out my program Design Improv with Triangles, and I hope to see you soon because I've really enjoyed being your guide. Okay, that is it for me for now. I will see you later. Bye for now.